Hello, my name is Noah, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I would like to discuss something that I believe personally doesn't get enough attention in the widespread media. The topic I'm referring to now is money management within a relationship. Throughout this video, I would like to cover a few statistics that I've found alarming while researching this topic, and hopefully by the end of the video, you can understand the importance of financial planning for a successful relationship. I would now like to get into some of the data that I found while personally researching this project. The first statistic that I found is provided from the American Psychological Association and states that around 40 to 50% of all first marriages will end in divorce. The rate for second marriage divorce is actually a little bit higher at 60 to 67%. And it's not stated here, but I did read also that the rate for third marriage divorces is even higher, I believe surpassing 70%. What this basically means is that quantity doesn't quite equal quality. And it also means that, from all of the pictures and posts and so on that you're seeing and that I'm seeing of individuals from high school or college that are getting married, about 40 to 50% are likely going to end in divorce at some point within that marriage, which is a relatively alarming statistic, and it's a little bit depressing as well. The second stat that I found relatively interesting was that the average length of a marriage prior to the divorce is 8 years. There's also a statistic that's not listed on here, but I did read about stating that the highest age range for divorces is around 25 to, I believe, 35 to 39. And if we can take this piece of data here, stating that the average time between the day of the marriage and the day of the divorce is 8 years, we can kind of construe that people married relatively early on, right, between 18 to 30 are in that big basket of frequent divorcees. So that is also a little bit telling when you look around and see who's getting married and at what age they're getting married at. There's a few statistics on this board, but the highlighted one is what really pertains to what we're kind of discussing here, and that states that 38% of marriages are, or pardon me, 38% of divorces are somewhat related, if not primarily related, to financial problems between the couple or between the family, whatever it may be. That's a pretty big amount. It's nearly 40%, so it's definitely something that shouldn't really be taken lightly. So that's kind of where I would like to step in and kind of try to ameliorate these problems before they get to the divorce state. The last statistic that I have here is that 66% of men and 74% of women think that their partners should have worked harder to save the marriage. The way I construe this statistic is that, both parties tend to, like blaming the other person, or not necessarily blaming, but at least assigning a certain amount of blame that the marriage failed because of them. Obviously, it looks like women tend to blame a little bit more frequently, almost 10% more, at 74%. But this is also pretty significant because it allows us to kind of construe reasons as to why these divorces might be occurring. The next example that I want to show you is a personal example that I experienced while performing financial analysis for a couple clients of mine, and it basically sort of brings these few statistics to life and shows a reason as to why getting your finances in check early on in your life and in a relationship is most likely a good preventative measure to get away from these issues down the road. That's what we'll be looking into next. Okay, now it's time for the example that I was just referring to. In this example, I want to take two individuals. In this case, their names are John and Jane. John and Jane are a couple that live together that are very serious. They're not married, but they intend on getting married sometime within the future. I want to go through some of their basic finances, then I'm going to extend uh, the analysis portion of it a little bit, and then we're going to kind of look to see if we can find some indicators that might show us that these two individuals might have some issues down the road that resemble the statistics that we went over previously. Let's start with John here. So John has a income take home of 51,800. So this is going to be after taxes. His total expenses for the year were 50,400, so relatively close to what he took home. His savings for that year were 1,300, and the investments that he made in that year were $2,400. Now to his partner Jane. Jane had a take home of 44,000, so a little bit less than her partner John. Her expenses were quite a bit lower, but that would make sense naturally because her take-home income was lower as well. Her savings for the year were quite a bit higher at 5,300, and her investments that she made during the year were half, so 1,200. When I do my service at AFA, I like to take things to a step the next level of analysis, basically. So I like to dig as deep as possible without becoming obsessive. So I'm going to extend what we see here like this. Boom. So this is something that I like to do within my service, which is basically categorizing all of the expenses into kind of viewable sections, right? So I like to categorize your rent or your mortgage and your utilities, your groceries, your dining, your investing, and even down to your cellular bill. And this is a good way, I believe, to really get a good picture of what an individual's finances look like throughout the year. So I want to go through the two couple or the two individuals in the couple here and kind of just compare. You can see here that they do have, the same amount of rent and the same amount of utilities, and that's just because it's split pretty much down the middle. Groceries, we can see here, John has about double, a little bit less than double of what Jane has. Dining out are relatively similar. John has a little bit more in dining. I do have investing highlighted here because it is something that I'm going to touch on in just a second. And obviously from the previous slide, we know that John invested, he did invest double, but it was 2,400 comparative to 1,200 that Jane invested. Now we get into discretionary charges or expenses. John did have about $1,000 more. Entertainment, this is where things look pretty stark. John's entertainment expenses are significantly more than what we see with Jane. John had $6,000 in his entertainment expenses versus Jane's 1,200 for the year. Beauty, Jane is going to pull a little bit more, about triple, just with all of the different things that she likes to do for her nails and her hair and so on. Fitness is the same for both. They both have the same gym memberships, so that's going to be the same. John has quite a bit more of a vehicle payment than Jane does. Gasoline is pretty much the same. Cellular, pretty much the same. They do split their pet fees or pet expenses between, down the middle for their one pet. And medical is relatively similar as well, and that's going to be on an individual basis usually. And then, of course, there's miscellaneous expenses that occur throughout the year, and Jane's going to have $2,400 for miscellaneous expenses compared to John's $1,200. So one thing, while performing the analysis that I talked about with the two clients was what a concern was for both of them in regards to, their finances as a whole, right? Because if you're if you're a couple, if you're a serious couple looking to potentially be married one day, right? It's unless you have one individual making, well over multiple six figures or whatever it may be, you usually have to work together to try to reach your goals of home ownership and retirement planning and so on. So one of the concerns on both sides was that the John and Jane both thought that the other person could be doing more within the relationship to help them plan for the future, right? The future portion of planning. And when we really dig into it, we can see that the opinions of the individuals doesn't necessarily match what the data tells us. So as far as future planning goes, one might say, investing, right? Investing is a good form of future planning. And clearly, John does have double of what Jane does, 2,400 comparative to 1,200. So that would be an example of where John might say, or where he did say, I feel as though I'm doing more to plan for a future. Although, when we look into a different aspect of the finances, I want to go down to right here, right? I want to highlight the savings, the entertainment, and then investing, because these are the three portions that are really significant when we're analyzing finances, especially when we have opinions associated with them. So we know that John mentioned that he thought he was doing quite a bit more as far as the future planning in investing goes, and that's double, right? So that's technically true. But we can look at Jane, who has a significant pay decrease or pay cut compared to John, and we can see that she's saving, almost about 4 times as much, 3 point whatever. And, the savings is also significant because if they're looking to get into home ownership, right, generally you're going to, use a lump sum from your savings to cover down payments and closing costs and furniture and, bills and whatever are associated with the first stages of buying a home. So we can see that despite the fact that John makes an argument that he thinks he's planning a little bit more than she is for their future, Jane is actually, contributing quite a bit, arguably more than John is for, their unified expenses. In this case, it would be a house. Don't get me wrong. Investing is definitely important, but if you buying a house is on the agenda, that's not something that you're going to want to overlook either. And the reason I highlighted entertainment is because the main reason being that John is having quite a bit more fun throughout the year than Jane. Right? He's spending $6,000 on his entertainment expenses versus Jane's 1,200. So we can see why Jane might construe this as unequal, because we can see that if she would have, if she wanted to save the same amount that John wanted to, this $5,000 could have gone into her entertainment and they could have been having the same amount of fun, right? But the savings would have been a completely different story. So we can see, it's very clear that we can see both sides of the spectrum here. John thinks that he's contributing, which technically he is, but it's not to the extent that he might think, right? And Jane believes that she's contributing quite a bit as well, which clearly she is, and she's also making the sacrifice of not having the $6,000 in entertainment that John did throughout the year. So this is basically a pretty solid example of why I believe getting ahead of your finances early on in a relationship, if you believe it's a serious relationship, is a really good thing to do, because we really don't want to end up in that basket, right, of 8 years into the marriage, having a divorce because of something like this that could have been prevented very early on into the relationship. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you very much. If you have any feedback, please leave it in the comment section below. If you have any questions for me or about my service at ARC Financial Analysis, I've left a link for my company website in the description below as well. Thank you and take care.